Welcome to the Stoa. The Stoa is a digital campfire where we cohere and dialogue about what matters most at the knife's edge of what's happening now. So let's do some check-ins. I like to do emotional check-ins at the beginning of these now to kind of ground myself in authenticity. So I feel a little nervous. It's like maybe 45%, just like bubbling up right here. And that's associated with, or adjacent to that, it's like this delicious thumos. Just talking to Jack earlier and just riffing with him about the history of certain spaces on the internet was quite exciting. So welcome to the Stoa. I am the steward of the Stoa, Peter Lindbergh, and I'm viewing the Stoa as a place that is stewarded by a Stoic, but not necessarily a place to practice and talk about Stoicism. That will surely happen here. I am viewing it as a digital campfire for us to cohere and dialogue about what matters most at the knife's edge of this moment. And I'm inviting all these cool guests coming in, experimenting with different psychotechnologies. Benita Roy was in earlier. She had a psychotechnology playground, and it's like my mind just got like zapped afterwards, and everyone's like they couldn't think. And I see people talking about Epic Beard. I think a good psychotechnology is just to sit in silent meditation, just stare at Jack Murphy's beard, and just get the thumos that comes from it. So we have Jack Murphy on today, and Jack is a leader, organizer of something called the Liminal Order. He's the host of a podcast called Jack Murphy Live, and the author of a book called Democrat to Deplorable. And his podcast, I was talking to him about this beforehand. It's like he has this like a certain quality and aesthetics to it I quite like. And his guest selection, there's a certain like kind of edginess, like a correct edginess. He has like delicious tacos on, Brown Jade Pervert, and he also has a sense making mentions like Jordan Hall and John Robb and whatnot. So I definitely recommend everyone check that out. So today, Jack is going to share his thoughts on the liminal war and the rise of info militias. And I'll hand it to him in a moment. So how's it going to work? He's going to share his thoughts, and then maybe I'll warm him up with some questions. And if you have a question for Jack, just write it in the chat box, and then I'll call on you, and you can unmute yourself and read it to Jack. Alternatively, just indicate if you want me to read on your behalf, and I will do so. So that being said, I will allow Jack to unmute himself and hand it over to him.
Thanks, Peter. How's everybody doing? I'm very excited actually to be here because I've been watching Peter for a little bit. I think I first came across him when the Culture War white paper came out, and I found that to be fascinating. And I've also been sort of running in some of the same circles as Peter by talking to Jordan and John Robb, as he said, and Jim Rutt and I have had some dialogues over the last couple of years as well. And so I'm actually pretty excited to be here, but I too am getting a little sense of nerves. And that I think comes from one, just being happy to be here, but two, I am, the extent of my philosophy background and education is limited to like intro to political philosophy in college. And then I took a Marx class. And then from there, I just transferred into economics. So I'm not like a philosopher by any means, and there's certainly gaps in my academic understanding of the world. But I consider myself to be sort of in the trenches and sort of on the ground. And sort of discovering philosophy through practice, and trying to learn the terms of the things that we're discovering, and trying to sort of fit ourselves. And when I say we, I mean the guys, the men of the Liminal Order, and sort of my social media audience, fit us into the world and what's happening here. A lot of what we do is, I don't want to say it's reactionary because that word has a lot of weight to it, but we're sort of adapting and just moving on the fly. And then I'm learning from you guys and from other people what the big words are that describe what we're doing. And John Robb especially, and Jordan Hall especially, have been very helpful in helping give me context and also help give me some direction. So I first discovered Jordan talking about the Blue Church and the situational assessment. I'm sure many of you read back in 2016 or 17 or so, where I began to understand the legacy media, the top down centralized communication structures of the past, the one to many communication, and the total domination of narrative control from a small cabal of people who wanted to manage us and everyone else, and also understanding the value that that brought in terms of social cohesion, where we all sort of believed in could believe in a story that we held in our head and united around that imagined order that gives us a society and civilization. But as I, got to know Jordan better and got to understand the material better and got to understand where we were in the world, I'm understanding that we're now talking many to many, and the centralized communication and information flow has been disrupted in a major way. And watching the evolution of decentralized both political movements as well as information networks has been at once educational and inspirational and motivational for me, because it did reveal gaps and it does reveal sort of the problems and things that we're facing in the future. And I participated early on in a decentralized information network called the Manosphere. I don't know how many of you are familiar with that, but it was a phenomenon that bubbled up from the deepest and darkest corners of the internet over time, starting in the 2005 to 2010 range. And it was just it was a response to radical feminism and some crazy super out there ideas that people found to be oppressive, and it was just a way for people to link up networks, share notes and information, and develop a cohesion and a story for themselves, and even just on the ground tactical ways to improve their lives. And that evolved over time. And there were other movements, sort of like Gamergate, which is another decentralized political movement that happened. I'm sure some of you are familiar with that. And then also the cancel culture, which is not my friend. It's not something I'm interested in, but that is also another form of a decentralized effort, where people congregate around common goal, which in my case was like getting me doxxed and fired from my old job. And it happens to other people in certain other ways. And then those networks sort of dissipate after that. So I'm a product of, I'm learning about and sort of experiencing on the ground at all time this effect of decentralized information networks and decentralized political movements. And the talk of what we want to talk about today is this term info militia. And I actually just sort of first started writing about that a couple of weeks ago. It just kind of came out in conversation, and it had a really nice ring to it, and it really summarized what we're doing in the Liminal Order, which is itself a decentralized sense-making apparatus. And during this time of Corona and COVID, uh, we have sort of proven the thesis of the Liminal Order, which is that we need to have our own sense making apparatus, our own ability to discern what's right and what's wrong. And then to carry Jordan's personal sovereignty notions further, then we want to take that information and then we want to embody it in what we're doing. We want to embody these ideals, and we want to build the integrity and the strength that we need in order to embody those ideals and to sort of move forward. And what I've discovered using this word info militias, which was sort of offhand, but now I've sort of gone back to sort of look at the definitions behind info and militias and to try to put it into a framework. I think we all know what information is, but a militia in particular, the definition of militia is a military force that is raised from the civil population to supplement a regular army in an emergency. And so it got me thinking, we're clearly in a state of crisis in a number of different ways. The first one, just obvious right now, is Corona and COVID, right? But larger than that, we have a sense-making crisis, we have a narrative crisis, we have a social cohesion crisis, we have a community crisis, we have a loss of confidence, And maybe the most powerful crisis we're facing is a sense of overwhelming complexity in the world. So there is an emergency, a state of emergency out there that it requires the raising of a private army to both make sense of and then to uh, not only endure but to thrive in this environment. And this is the fundamental notion behind the liminal order, is that we're living in a crisis and we have to do things on our own. And so what we've seen during Corona, which I think has been, for all the negatives, obviously, there's too many to list, there have been some positives. And one of the positives is seeing how the decentralized information sort of sense making apparatus worldwide has really stepped up, I think. And there are a number of different nodes out there where people are able to do the research, do the analysis, clear signal from noise, and come to a cohesive understanding of either what the virus is or what the government is going to do. That's been my main focus. I don't really know anything about viruses, but I can predict what the government is going to do. And so in the liminal order, for example, we were in mid-February, we were already at a state of emergency within the liminal order. We had recommended to all of our people that they start stockpiling, they get masks, they, hydrochloroquine, vitamin C, a million different things. So we were really prepared because we are dedicated to actually making sense of what's going on out there in the world, because we realize that there is a crisis of complexity, a crisis of leadership, continuing on from 2008, 2009 financial crisis, the corruption in academia, et cetera, all the things that you guys know about. So we knew that we had to be proactive about going out and finding the information that we needed in order to survive. Basically, this became an issue. Obviously, not millions of people are dying, but it seemed like, and it is for many people, a matter of life or death. And the information that we're getting from the CDC and from the World Health Organization and from, the administration and from corporations, not helpful enough by any means. And so the liminal order has proven the thesis that there is a crisis. It's a crisis of information, and that in a time of crisis, in order to supplement the regular forces, these militias need to arise, and they have arisen. They have risen, and the liminal order is just but one of these info militias that have risen up to fill the gap, to cover up for complexity, to make sense. And in our case, we really are trying then to carry it even a few steps further, and then go into the both embodiment and integrity and choice of how to live our lives and to sort of represent the ideals that we have. So that was the main thrust of why Peter reached out to me, was to talk about the info militia term. The other theme that I wanted that sort of is overarching all of this is the fact that we're at the end of the era of indiscriminate connection, right? So through internet, social media, World Trade Organization, NATO alliance expansion, and corporate connections, supply chains, etc. There was a time period for the last 20, 30, 40 years where connecting and outward reach and expansion was sort of the number one goal. And there was, I'm calling it indiscriminate connections. And now we're seeing that era is over, and that we're now moving into an age of strategic disconnection. So all the value of just running out and connecting with people all over the world has been wrung out, I believe. And now the next phase, the next leg up of value is going to be in actually making strategic decisions of disconnection. And again, liminal order is embodying that. We're living that. We've decided to sort of step back away from social media and the random connections that can be made that way, and to focus our energy and relationship building and networking within a high trust, high value private network that's got high security and is committed to the same goals. So all of this is in the same theme. The end of the end of the expanding era is over, and we're moving now towards strategic disconnection. And as by way of example, we saw Japan just recently announced that they are spending like $2 billion to figure out how to get businesses and factories out of China and back into Japan. So this is a process that's just beginning. It's sort of like an unwinding of the great expansion era of the last 20, 30, 40 years. And the smart money is figuring out ways to strategically disconnect and to create a higher trust, higher value network. And that's going to be trade, government, political networks, social media, military alliances, even social distancing, right, in our regular day-to-day relationships. So those are the general themes that Peter wanted to talk about. And, I can talk about any one of those, dig down for hours on any one of those subjects there, but I just wanted to throw that out there and sort of get the discussion started. And, again, thank you guys for having me here. It's very exciting and fun stuff to talk about. And I'm sure we're going to have a good discussion coming up after this. So thank you very much, Peter. And there you go. There's the intro.
Very, very cool. Yeah, that's a lot of good threads are coming up for me. So I'll warm Jack up with a few questions. If you have questions, write in the chat box, and I'll eventually call on you to mute yourself. If you want me to read it on your behalf, just indicate that. I'm going to use my discernment what questions to read, so they might not be read in order, and we might not get to all the questions. Yeah, so the first one, just sort of like a practical question, and I understand if you don't want to answer all of these due to secrecy or whatever, but like, how did the Liminal Order start? Like, how many members? Like, how do you like organize? Like, let's like real brass tacks of it.
Sure. So we are just over 200 active members. We have most of them in the United States, but we're in 7 countries around the world, 3 different continents. It is technically and will be. It's an all men's network. That was part of our answer. The general theme is this is an answer to the culture war. We don't want to fight the culture war in public. We don't want to do social media battles. We don't want to participate in cancel culture. Our philosophy is to step back, strategically disconnect, build deep roots outside of the glare of social media, outside of the public. This is born out of me being doxxed and me having my whole life turned on its head. Some of you probably are unfamiliar, but I was working in charter schools. I was executive director of charter schools, which they in themselves are also decentralized networks that are an evolution in the way that we do things. And one day Antifa, which is like this radical left organization, decided that they wanted to dox my pen name. And so they went to my employer and called me all kinds of horrible names, Nazi, racist, alt-right, none of which is true. But their whole goal was to get me fired. So the Liminal Order is sort of born out of my personal experience. We want to step back from social media. We want to build a high trust, high value private network with secure multiple forms of communication. We have a highly secure message system called Wicker. So that's one way. We have a forum, which is another way, email list, as well as United States Postal Service. So we have multiple redundant, overlapping communication systems. They're all based in different countries with different political risks and such too. So if we get shut down on one channel, we will have other multiple channels of communication. And the general idea is, and this is partly a genesis of working with Jordan, is that we wanted to improve our personal sovereignty, and we want to improve our ability to make sense of the world, to discern what's right and what's wrong and what's good and what's bad. And then we want the power to actually live that out. And so we work on meditation, we work on physical fitness, we have physical fitness standards. We study things like 4th generation warfare with naval officers and U.S. Naval Academy professors. We're studying logic right now with a college professor who teaches logic. We've done cognitive behavioral therapy. So we're trying to figure out how to control our emotions, how to think more clearly, how to understand the world around us. 4th generation warfare, very important concept right now. And then do it in a community of men with who want to save the world, basically, starting by improving ourselves, then our family, then our community. And if you can get that far, then maybe you can have some impact on the nation or on the national conversation. So that's the general gist. And we have a waiting list of 1,500 people, and we've got the doors closed because our growth is meant to be strategic, and it's a very personal, intense experience. And so we onboard people as we have the capacity to take them on.
And so what's coming up, it's interesting. So as you mentioned, and some people might know, like I study the culture war and talk about mimetic tribes. And one of them I listed was the Manosphere. And you and I were riffing off that before, like the kind of the history of it. And my read on the Manosphere, like not the current version, but the one back in the heyday, was like, it was like an intersection between kind of three different things, like culture war politics, kind of like self-help, and
Mhm.
what would be the other one? There's something else there, but yeah, at least those are two intersection, or masculinity, like a kind of the cultivation of
Right.
masculinity in men. Um, and the self-help piece is kind of interesting because John Vervaeke calls the ecology of practices, right? And I know, like back in the Return of King days, they talked about, like, you got to get your finances order, you got to get game, you got to get like deadlift, and it was purpose towards like being a better man or getting women or whatever. But now it seems like that ecology of practices is well suited to maintain one's sovereignty in this liminal state. So it's interesting that how that trajectory occurred. So I just I'm curious if you had any thoughts on that.
Well, I keep saying I'm a product of today, right? Like, I'm attuned to what's going on, and I'm also a product of it. So I was born, my online life was born in that universe. And you're absolutely right. Like, the focus on your personal strength and fitness, your financial independence, emotion and mental control, mindset control, self-talk, all these things were, and I'm not sure of my audience, so forgive me if I going to offend anybody with this, but the reason the manosphere existed in the first place is because of the crisis of masculinity and attack on masculinity. Uh, there's an ongoing, decades-long war on masculinity, and if someone wants to get into the details and the numbers, I can share those with you. There has been an ongoing feminization of science and the economy. There has been ongoing de-risking of the economy and of politics. And all these things are tied together. I discovered that which upsets the bedroom and our personal relationships is also the same thing that's disrupting our economy and our politics. And they're all tied together. And one of the answers, for me and for a lot of my guys, is to focus on developing a new sense of positive masculinity and using that as a foundation to improve ourselves, our family, our community, and the nation. They're all tied together. They're all tied together. And because of it's wild to me that the answers that we came up with 10, 12, 15 years ago, which, by the way, are not new, right? This is like old time stuff, ancient wisdom, but that has been lost, right? And it needed to be refined and readdressed for today and put into terms that we can understand. The answers to solve the crisis of masculinity are also some of the answers to solve the crisis in our political sphere today. So to me, it's all linked, and it's all been part of one journey for me. I started pulling the thread. For me, this all started when I got divorced in 2009. I started pulling the thread, and I've been pulling the same thread, and that's led me to this conversation right here. So to me, it's no great leap. It's all perfectly connected.
Hmm. Yeah. And, the question that, that's good. Yeah, the question that's coming up is sort of like, I imagine putting myself in your shoes when your backstory about kind of like the, losing your job and all that type of stuff. Uh, there's like a felt sense of resentment would emerge, like an anger, like a fuck you anger towards the blue church or whoever kind of like that construct would place it and put it in its place. So I'm curious how that you dealt with that energy, maybe transmuted it, and how it's currently present.
That's a great question. That's a great question. So there's multiple layers to that. Yes, there's definitely fuck you energy, which is about not losing. Like, I can't be defeated. That's part of it, right? Like, I'm not going to let Antifa, like legitimately Antifa. This is not like me guessing, right? It was like the actual flag on her banner, Twitter header, leader of DC Antifa made it a point to ruin my life. Okay. And I got investigated and fired and all this shit, and my name dragged through the mud. There definitely a sense of I can't be defeated. I'm not going to let them win. So that's one element, and I've been able to transmute, as you say, that energy into just trying to be proactive. The second thing is that there's we're not going to solve the cultural issues or the political issues, at least I'm not, by like writing papers and trying to lobby Congress, right? This is a bottom up solution. And so I wanted to, my response to this, and channeling my anger and direction into something productive, is to get out of all of that and to go deep and private and secure and high trust, so we can build communities that have roots and that have actual impact. And there's definitely a sense of anger, but it has dissipated. I got doxxed in January 2018. I'll admit that the 12 months following that were really tough. Imagine you're 43 years old and your whole reputation's up in smoke. Your undergrad, graduate degree, 20 years on your resume, none of it means anything anymore, because when somebody searches your name, it says that you're some sort of Nazi, which is complete nonsense, but it's out there, right? It's very difficult to defend against. So this is my reaction, right? This is my fighting back. This is my way of quote getting revenge, but I don't see it in a negative light like that, because I see us as doing something very positive for people. And the amount of positive feedback I've gotten from my audience, it's 30, 40,000 people on Twitter, thousands of people have read my book, 200 guys in the Liminal Order, the just endless amount of positive feedback I get tells me that I'm doing something that is good for people and good for the country, good for the world. Hopefully, that doesn't carry with it that spite that that you might that
Mm,
you might think. And I do appreciate that question, because it's good for me to consider my motivations at the same time. So thanks.
mm. So I'll hand it over to the Q&A in a moment. But another question is coming up. I saw this tweet I quite liked. Uh, and it was pithy. It's like, the virus broke woke.
Mm.
Um, and I'm curious what you think about that. If the whole kind of the social justice warrior, the meta tribe, what is their power dynamics? What's the power dynamics like in this liminal space that we're in?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think right now it's only been it's only been, what, a month or so of it really being in the news. So the most definitive thing we can say that is put a pause on it, right? Like, I feel like the traffic in those areas and those words and those battles has slowed, but then again, everything else is paused too, right? So it's going to be hard to say. Maybe I'm hopeful that the virus broke the woke. Maybe I'm hopeful about that. It has, I think, for a lot of us, helped put us in a situation of prioritizing what is important, what's valuable, where should we be spending our attention. But I do suspect, unfortunately, that because of the pervasiveness of woke thinking in academia, critical theory everywhere, social justice warriors everywhere, corporations, media, HR everywhere. You know, before the virus, my thought was that it was going to take decades even to work that stuff out of the system. So to the extent that this may accelerate things a little bit, I would be hopeful. But once we get back to some semblance of normal, even if it doesn't look like it did, 2 months ago, I have a feeling that a lot of that stuff is going to come back. And hell, we're seeing some of it in the way that people are calling the virus racist. I mean, I don't know how a virus can be racist. It can impact people differently, but it's not like it's choosing to do so. But anyway, um, I do have hope for that, but at the same time, that woke shit is really embedded in our culture right now.
Cool. So I'm going to hand it over to Q&A, but I think it's prudent for me to say this. I think it's safe to say you're my most controversial guest so far of the Stoa. Um, and I imagine, because I'm viewing the Stoa as a digital campfire for anyone to come, and we might have intersectional feminists coming to speak here. We have all sorts of people, mimetic tribes, coming here, and I'm welcoming them as long as they respect kind of the space and the fire that's burning. But I'm thinking, just being prudent right now. So if someone's triggered or they're emotionally sensitive in the audience about something that was said, you can feel free to ask a question. Jack loves being challenged, but no more than one follow-up question. I'm just going to cut it off at that, just to set that kind of frame and parameter. Because it's not just going to be some messy debate that's going to form or anything like that. So with that preface, Daniel Kazanjian, could you unmute yourself?
Yeah. So first of all, Jack, thank you so much for sharing. I'm feeling like that you have like this earnest, like groundedness in the way that you speak. That you're genuinely trying to say what you believe to be true, and I really appreciate that. This question, I don't know if you're actually the right person for me to ask it to, so feel free to sidestep it. But it emerged as you were talking. I'm wondering if you have any insights on the role of the positive feminine. I've heard Jordan Hall allude to the particular importance of the feminine to rise up in response to the meta crisis. And I am partial to your diagnosis that there has been some sort of attack on masculinity. I don't know if I'd use those words in particular, but there's something resonant about that. So another way to phrase it that you might be able to respond to is, where do you see the limits of the positive masculine in the current crisis?
Yeah, that's a very good question, and perhaps Jordan Peterson might be better to field this one. I know that he's very into the notion of the Great Mother, and like all things, though, masculinity can exist without femininity. It's yin and yang, and I think you need equal parts. What we're experiencing right now is like a disequilibrium, in my opinion. And I would even argue that there is also a crisis of femininity as well. There's been a great just general neutering of gender expression or the archetypical experiences of who we are based on our biology and our experiences. And in my book, I really explore a lot of these questions about determinism versus blank slate, and how essential is our biology to our behavior and therefore into our society and our structures. And I would never say that we don't need femininity. In fact, we need it. We need it just as much as we need positive masculinity. What we need is champions for both. And I feel like what happened over the last 20, 30, 40 years is that there's become no champion for either. The sense of a traditional, and you can define this however you want, femininity was sort of cast aside for a championing of a male ideal. But then at the same time, for men, that male ideal was diminished and pushed aside and devalued. So, in fact, we've got both pushing the wrong and up and pushing the right down at the same time, and we need to sort of re-embrace that, as far as I know. And I don't ever put a value on either one as being higher or lower. They're essential. We're pairs. We're designed to be complementary, not to compete with each other. And I would just like a little bit more honesty about that, right? And honesty in embracing our differences. Like, um, what is the name escaping me? The gentleman from Google who wrote the memo, James Damore. James Damore wrote the memo where all he did was cite a bunch of like commonly accepted psychological studies about the differences in our tendencies, group differences. And you saw what happened to him, fired. And then also it revealed within Google, how far from accepting of basic reality they were, and they control our access to information. And so it that same sort of mindset is permeating not only just our relationships, but our technology and the algorithms and the way that we search for data and the data that's presented to us. And so again, I would stress mutual benefit for both, a yin and a yang, complementary, and not putting a value judgment on either one, but just stressing the fact that we need to champion them both.
Cool. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you for that compliment earlier too. I appreciate it.
Rachel Haywire. That's a good question. Follow-up question.
Yeah, I would like to know, based on what you've been saying about the feminine, what's your opinion on the young women who brand themselves as trad wives now? Like, got a like 20 to 25-year-old girls. It's like a subculture, but I'm not sure they're actually wives.
Right. So it's always tough to tell what is like online posturing versus what is reality, and who's trying to glom on to certain social media phenomena. But I think in general, I support and believe in women's choices to do whatever they want to do, whether that's trying to be the CEO of a corporation, or to stay home and homeschool 5 kids and to sew all their own clothes and, do local farming and whatever. So I think that a response to this extended period of feminism, radical feminism, and I don't mean equality, like I believe in equality of rights for everybody, et cetera, this sort of next level mutation that we're into now. I think that's a natural pushback, just like the rise of the Manosphere was a natural pushback. Also, a rise of traditional wives or traditional women or traditional femininity, it will also be a sort of a natural pushback. So I'm unsurprised by it. I question anybody's branding of stuff. Daniel, you pointed out that I have a sense of authenticity about me, which I think is how I've been able to build an audience. Like, I've never set forth to like brand myself in a particular way. It's just all natural evolution of who I am. But the trad wife stuff, it's hard to tell, how much of it is just LARPing and how much of it is for real. But I do support that kind of thinking, and I do think it's, look, if you have to ask yourself, is a world which is extreme. I always like to make these extreme cases, but a world in which you've got, women in their late 30s and early 40s who wish they had families, but instead have careers, versus women in their late 30s, early 40s that have families and wish they had careers. I'm not sure which world would you rather have. I think that I prefer the one that focuses on the family and raises children and keeps them out of the clutches of our, some of our more, pernicious public education scenarios, et cetera, and just give people a place to transmit their own values to their children rather than allowing other people to do it for them.
All right, we've got like a bunch of juicy questions rolling in now. So Sam wants me to read this one on his behalf. How do you, also the Liminal Order yourself, see the next 5 years unfolding? Are you guys prepping for a collapse, social, economic, ecological, or a positive reset in the mid long term?
Yeah, that's a great question. If you would have asked me that 2 months ago, I would have had a totally different answer for you, much more definitive. Right now, the chess pieces are being moved around in a way that's going to preclude any predictions of the next 3 to 5 years. It's entirely possible that we're going to see a 20 to 30 to 40% annualized reduction in GDP in the second quarter. Okay. When have we ever lived through anything like that? We have absolutely no idea what's going to come. We don't know how the economy is going to respond, how the economy is going to bounce back. We don't know to what extent our personal liberties are going to be semi-permanently, violated through whatever precautions that we have to take. I mean, we're all sitting at home right now because the government ordered us to do that, right? I mean, yeah, we're home because we don't want to get sick, but at the same time, personal liberties are in question. I really have no idea what's going to happen. We are prepping in the sense that we have united ourselves into a tribe, a group of people, a network that sees the world similarly. We share information and tactics and strategies and even finances and resources. We had guys, somebody who's in this chat actually send, he had a back supply of masks and sent them to our people on the front lines. And we've got people, we share financial resources with each other in times of crisis and need. So we're preparing for the future in that way by doubling down with our organization, our fraternal network, our professional network. What is going to, I really have no idea. And you can tell that I'm not the only one, because the markets are in turmoil, businesses are in turmoil, governments are in turmoil, our health organizations are in turmoil, everything right now. I mean, if there was ever a liminal moment, so the name of the group is Liminal Order, right? Because 2 months ago, it was we accepted that we were in a state of liminality due to the change in technology, social media, information distribution, the end of the top-down, information network or distribution channels. But now, we're in like 10x liminal state. The economy, the financial network, the financial system, culture, society, civil liberties, health, the way that we just socialize and spend time, everything is in flux, and we are clearly in the wilderness between 2 points of stability. And to anyone that says that they know what's going to happen in the next 12, 18, 24 months is lying to you. The only reasonable perspective and posture at this point in time is I have no idea. So what do you do to prepare for that? Meditate, work out, get strong, build a community, build a network, build a team, get with a good team, and then together you can figure out how to navigate. So one of the issues, and I wrote this down, I didn't get to it, was OODA the OODA. So that's basically our philosophy. Is our the OODA loop is a way of orienting to the world and then changing and then adapting, right? And our goal is to create a system where the goal isn't an outcome, a specific outcome, but rather designing for emergence, is the title of one of my podcasts was, and designing a system where we iterate faster than anybody else. That's the goal. That's the only thing that we can do right now is figure out how to iterate faster, so that we can adapt to the changing environments and the changing information flow, and then figure out what to do. I have no idea what it's going to be like. So in the meantime, I'm going to tune up my instrument as best I can, and to build a system that provides answers at the time that the answers reveal themselves.
That's awesome. Okay, Tyson.
Hey, Jack.
Hey, Tyson.
I'm curious about some of the main challenges or obstacles that have kept you from growing beyond 200 in the liminal order so far, and like to what extent it might you feel that it could be optimal to like keep it to a limited quantity, like Dunbar's number, for example, the maximum number of people you can have for coherence. And then maybe just add on to that, like in the early stages, like when you were before 200, like what was like a starting point of a number of members to like get something going and happening, and yeah, just like what you learned from that, or what is and you see as like an optimal group to start organizing.
Right. So there's a bunch of things there. Yeah, it's very difficult to maintain personal relationships over a certain amount, whether it's 100, 150 or whatever, or whether you count the ones that are online or your personal ones or your family ones. It is hard to maintain a huge number of personal relationships. But the limiting factor for us right now is communication technology. We haven't figured out the right software or the right application that's going to allow us to incorporate too many more people, let's say over 500 or something like that at this point. The goal within the liminal order, though, and I've brainstormed about this quite a bit, and I haven't come up with the right word yet. I want to call it atomizing, but that's not really it. It's sort of like creating micro universes within. So there's power to network, right? With at a certain point, each additional member to the network doesn't just add plus one. All the relationships, it's greater than one. So each person you add, the marginal return is even bigger than just one person. So you want to have a network that brings you network power, right? But you get limited through infrastructure bottlenecks, and you get limited by when the signal to noise ratio changes. So what I've encouraged guys in the liminal order to do, and there's a number of them here in the chat right now, is to create subgroups and sub-universes within. So we're united overall through a similar worldview. We can participate at large in large group sessions and large group events. But then the real deeper personal connections come from the microization or atomization, or just keeping your groups sort of small within the larger organization. And we're working on building that kind of culture right now. And it's a different mindset for some people. But we take on, maybe 30 or 40 or 50 people every couple of months, digest them into the system, get everybody acclimated. And part of it also is really just sort of preserving the culture, right? If we brought in 500 people all at once, then the culture just becomes whatever those people are bringing with them. Whereas as we trickle people through, our onboarding process is extensive, and you don't just get thrown in there. You have to go through a whole system of things. We're trying to really get them to adapt into our culture so we can preserve the culture itself. So it's strategic growth rather than just growth for growth's sake at this point. But eventually we're also going to need some new tech. So we're looking at Urbit. We're looking at Dry.io. We're looking at a few ways to code and create our own systems that are completely independent and off the main networks as well too.
So here's a question. I'm going to read it, and it's anonymous, so it's going to be good. Or they asked to be anonymous. So I'm interested in the type of private and public narratives that will emerge from your militia, your order, if you have an exclusive group. Yeah, that's the question.
So private and public narratives that emerge from our exclusive group. Well, the private narrative that saved a bunch of lives and money in the last couple of months was like, hey, this corona thing is going to be a big deal. You better get your shit in order. That narrative was ahead of the others. So we were definitely at least 3 or 4 weeks in advance, and we put out posture papers and position papers to our community that allow people to get prepared. In terms of what we're going to put out publicly, I'm looking at my buddy here right now. We're still trying to figure out to what extent we're going to engage publicly. It's really the goal is about us as individuals within this network, to create a grassroots movement that's going to mature and evolve into positions of power where you can make change on the margins. That's sort of our goal, is just the same way the Blue Church raised people up and got them, indoctrinated. That's a bad word. I'm not going to use that word, but you know what I mean. And into positions of power where they're able to have high leverage impact on society. That's sort of our goal too. But that's going to take a long time, right? That's going to take time. And in the meantime, we're going to worry about ourselves and our families and our community. And that's our leverage there. The relationship with the public is one that we haven't figured out just yet. And again, I haven't come to this knowing the answers. Trying to design a system that's going to surface the best answer, the collective answer for us, and design something that will allow the right thing to emerge, rather than for me to just start off saying it's going to be this. That's too rigid. That's not what this world is about right now, right? This world is about iterating and iterating the iterating. Trying to absorb as much of this information as you can, and try to do the right thing and adjust on the fly. So that's what we're going with.
Dan, you had a question that was similar, but I like the framing of it. Would you like to ask it to Jack?
Sure. I asked 2 questions. Which is the first or the second question?
The most recent one about the optimal grip on reality.
Oh, okay. First of all, I want to thank you, Jack, for speaking with us today. I appreciate your sincerity and the good faith that you're coming forward in this dialogue with us. My question is, given the isolated culture that you are developing, what are you doing, if anything, to reach out to other cultures to ensure that you maintain an optimal grip on reality?
That's a good question. The Scott Adams in me says, what is reality and what is optimal, right? So there's a lot there. If we're getting the outcomes that we want, then we're optimizing our sense and our grip on reality. That's one sort of throwaway comment, which you could write a book on. The more practical answer to your question is that most all of us within LO are also outwardly tuned into massive social media networks, mass media, academia, politics, corporate world, finance, technology. So the way we're all engaged with outside. We're all engaged with the outside world, and we're all taking the information that we get from the outside world, then bringing it into liminal order, and then processing and analyzing it for ourselves and for our members. So we're not disconnected from reality in that sense, or from the larger culture, as it were. We have created our own culture, that's for sure, and we did that because we see it as something that's beneficial. But the way that we stay connected is by having everybody experiencing their own universe, their own cultures, their own communities, and whatnot, and then bringing it in, and then we process and analyze it, and then move forward. The outreach that we do in liminal order, as someone just mentioned, is on an individual basis anyway. So these are like, your friends or your colleagues or your associates, or someone that online social media. You reach out to them and you invite them and you explain what we're doing. And so there is a sense of outreach, but really we're meeting a demand. there's so many people out there that are hungry for community, right? That's like one of the first things that we offer is community, is a way to connect with people that actually care about you. And one of the things that we didn't even talk about here is, I mentioned it in passing, but we're like a mutual aid society at the same time. We've had guys go through crisis where they lose their job, or their wife, one of their children dies, or somebody's wedding was in doubt, and we've just instantly snapped to and raised thousands of dollars and sent it to them within an hour, and like save the day for them in some small way that we could. So this is about building personal relationships in a way where that the common worldview is there first, right? So for a lot of us, we're right of center, mostly Trump supporters, definitely part of the red insurgency, totally anti-blue church, etc. Most of us, our high concentrations are DC, New York, Austin, San Francisco. So we're already living in isolation and sort of stressful fear, and like you can't talk at work, and you can't share your ideas with your neighbors, and you have to whisper when you're out at bars and restaurants and whatever. And so this is fulfilling a real sense of like, I need brothers, right? Like I need men that I can relate to and depend on and care about, brotherly love, right? Like there's definitely a sense of love and compassion and empathy that we've fostered for each other. So it's all of these things that we're talking about, from sense making and all that stuff, all the way just down to like, man, I need a brother to love and to love me back, where you start with this common worldview, which is a novel way of organizing community, because in the past it's been, oh, you're my college roommate, or, oh, you work next door to me in the office, or, oh, you live next door to me. But none of those things ensure the fact that you're going to see the world the same way, or have the same concerns, or the same passions. That way, with this group, we can start with the passions and the worldview, and then form the personal relationships after that.
Cool. So this will be the last question. Malcolm Ocean, can you ask your shorter version of your question?
Yeah, I mean, basically just like, I'm noting that in your cultural context, it's like naturally it was coming out of this sort of manosphere thing, but that there could also be liminal teams that are coming from a different cultural context. And I'm part of another one that also has liminal in the name, but is based on a completely different culture. But it seems to me that we have some sort of shared cultural platform. So I guess I'm wondering, like, what do you see as possible collaborations between liminal teams that might have different cultural contexts in collectively transcending the culture wars? So it's like maybe you guys are helping people get out of the anger and fight of the manosphere, but then there might be some other people who are helping social justice warriors become like less ragey and more based on integrity as well. I'm interested in your take on that.
Yeah, well, I think I'm doing it right now. This is exactly the way that I see these things evolving, and the outreach, and just trying to cross over networks and try to share information. I mean, one thing that popped into my mind is, sure, we could like produce like a tech product or something that facilitate this kind of stuff, but more importantly, it's having these cross-pollinating conversations. The form and of this conversation here, I found to be very beneficial. I'm going to take some of this with me back to my conversations. I'm usually a facilitator in these kind of Zoom chats like this. So there's ways for us to cross-pollinate and to reach out and to share and compare notes. And networks working with networks is just one bigger network, in and of itself, right? So I think it's important that we all just keep talking, which is another reason why I'm always open to talk to anybody, basically, because these conversations are very powerful. They help us evolve our thinking. I mean, just the fact that Jordan Hall decided to come talk to me and then share, and we related, and then we had a follow-up, that was part of the genesis for Liminal Order, which now has 200 guys, which has changed lives across the country, which in very profound and powerful ways. So the conversations, it's easy to just look at this and be like, oh, it's just a bunch of people talking on the internet. But no, man, if you're paying attention and you're engaged and you're putting out your energy and you're receptive to other people's energy, you synthesize that. And then in 2 weeks or a month, you have an idea that percolates up into your consciousness. And then you take action and you build something. And then all of a sudden you're having real world impact and you're helping people. And it all came from that talk that you had, 3 months ago. So these kinds of experiences are very important, and that's why I'm here, and I want to keep doing it. And I'm just really grateful that you guys had me.
And on that, I had a conversation with Jared Janes and Jason Snyder yesterday when we actually were gossiping about who to mimetic mediate Jack with.
Yeah.
But a metaphor came up there, like there's going to be all these digital campfires that emerge. And then, we'll be able to see each other and we visit each other's campfires. So like, Jack visited the Stoa, this campfire. I'll be happy to visit his if he ever invites me.
Definitely.
So, yeah, so I'll close in a moment, but do you want to have any closing thoughts, Jack, about where people can find you or not find you?
The best way to find me is on Twitter at Jack Murphy Live. And then there's jackmurphylive.com as well. And then Liminal-Order, liminal-order.com. You can sign up for the mailing list there. We send out a bunch of stuff. But really, the best place to find me is on Twitter, and I continue to engage there because it is the best way for me to reach new people and to bring them into the greater network, and then we move them in a little bit closer, and then a little bit closer, and then into the core group. So we're always looking to expand the greater network, and really such thoughtful questions and earnest faces. I really appreciate it, and Peter, this has really been a lot of fun, and thank you guys very much. It's been great.
Very cool. So I'll make some announcements in a moment about upcoming events, but Jack, thank you so much for coming on, my friend. That was lovely. Thanks everyone for the excellent questions. So I'll talk about the couple upcoming events. This evening, we have at 7 p.m. Eastern time, we have Socratic speed dating with Raven Connolly, and we're combining speed dating with the Socratic method. I fully invite Jack and hope he comes to that one. And tomorrow we have a loving cringe meditation. I think that is at 2 p.m. Eastern time. So we're all going to watch that celebrity sing-along Imagine. We're going to feel cringe and judgment in our body, and then we're going to shine love on that as a spiritual exercise and also / artistic performance. And then Daniel Kazanjian, he's doing similar to the Liminal Order, what the Liminal Order has already established. He's doing a metagame mastermind out of the Stoa. So Daniel, if you're here, do you want to just unmute yourself and just talk a little about it?
Sure, yeah. So we're doing a prototyping session to find out how we can create digital gangs to help people cultivate personal sovereignty and respond to the meta crisis. Something that I think is particularly important right now because everybody's socially isolated. So this is week 2, and it's going to be a recurring session at 6 p.m. here at the Stoa.
And that's Eastern. Yeah, and that's Eastern time. Cool. And lastly, the Stoa is here as a gift for all of us to use in this time of need. If you're inspired to provide a gift to the Stoa, just go to the website and go to the gift economy at the bottom of the page. All right. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, guys. I really appreciate it. Take care.